Unless you have been living under a rock, everyone has heard all about the global trade war between China and the USA. However, what you don't know is that behind the headlines, China is quietly assembling a global alliance against the USA, not only to protect itself from Trump's tariffs, but to also destroy America's economic power for good. China is positioning itself as the champion of globalization, which contrasts to Trump's America First narrative. Although China was slapped with the harshest tariffs, Trump's tariffs on friendly nations and even on random penguins are alienating traditional trade partners and allies of the U.S. Chinese diplomats are flying off to all four corners of the globe, from Switzerland to Brazil, to Nigeria and to Japan, with one clear goal in sight: to shore up trade routes and to create a new world order, one that is led by China. Many of us use Chinese products on a day-to-day basis. Almost everything from our phones to coffee machines to clothes will show a Made in China label. In fact, last year, China had a record trade surplus of $1 trillion. No other country can match its export prowess, especially in terms of price and volume. China has trade surpluses with other 170 countries all around the world. In recent years, Chinese investments have reached more than 140 countries, especially in emerging regions like Africa and Latin America. These investments include ports, factories, railways, and more. China's overseas investments reached $162 billion, which is a 38% increase from 2019. Such is the extent of China's trade power that decoupling from them is impossible without a major worldwide recession. By now, we all know that trade wars are bad, especially for ordinary consumers like us. However, Trump doesn't seem to understand this.
I'm a very stable genius.
His insistence on tariffs have already caused a major stock market crash and a small 0.3% contraction in U.S. GDP since he returned to office. Despite a temporary ceasefire in the trade war, we all know Trump is unpredictable, and the war is likely to resume within a few months. In this new era of globalization, China senses an opportunity. Diplomatic efforts have been ramped up to the maximum. Last month, Chinese President Xi Jinping embarked on a tour of Southeast Asia, visiting Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia. These countries are part of the ASEAN trade bloc, kind of like the EU, but for Southeast Asia. ASEAN is China's largest trade partner. During his visit, Xi portrayed China as a friendly trade partner, one who promotes regional peace and stability. Over 100 different cooperation agreements were signed between China and these countries during Xi's visit, ranging from areas like infrastructure, science, and law enforcement to tackle crime. Malaysia's Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim even agreed to speed up the process for the signing of a new free trade agreement between China and ASEAN. China is also active in the Middle East, expanding its influence not just through trade, but also as a power broker. China is seen as a credible partner due to its support for a ceasefire in Gaza and for Palestinian solidarity, whereas many states in the region see the USA as hypocrites for its unconditional support for Israel. Trump's idea of resettling Gaza's population has also outraged many people in the region. China has overseen massive investments in Middle East, including the Haramain Railway between Mecca and Medina to transport pilgrims for Hajj, and the Middle East's largest power plant in Jeddah. More recently, Saudi Arabia and China has signed deals in areas like renewable energy and electric vehicles. Under Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 program to diversify its economy away from oil, major investments have been launched in manufacturing, tourism, and sports, of which China is a key partner. China accounts for 18% of Saudi Arabia's foreign trade. In fact, over 700 Saudi high schools even teach Mandarin as a foreign language in a bid to attract more Chinese tourists. Latin America as well has a strong Chinese presence. In 2000, China accounted for less than 2% of Latin America's exports. By 2021, trade exceeded a record $450 billion, and some economists predict that it could exceed $700 billion by 2035. This week, President of Brazil, Lula da Silva, visited China with a delegation of top politicians and business leaders, signing 20 different cooperation agreements. Brazil is one of the few countries that actually have a trade surplus, with China standing at $31 billion. Its most common exports to China include soybeans, oil, and iron ore. Da Silva expressed his desire to strengthen collaboration in areas like AI and renewable energy. China's Envision Energy announced a $1 billion investment to produce sustainable airplane fuel in Brazil. Meanwhile, the state-owned China Development Bank and the Export-Import Bank of China are among the region's leading lenders. Since 2005, they have loaned more than $120 billion to Latin American and Caribbean governments. Just this Tuesday, Xi Jinping promised to provide Latin American and Caribbean countries with a new $9 billion credit line and more infrastructure investment. He also promised to import more from Latin American countries. China has also reached out to Canada, hoping for stronger trade relations. Recently, China has emerged as a major importer of Canadian oil, while cutting U.S. oil imports by 90%. Canada is the fourth largest producer of crude oil, most of which flows to the U.S. However, given Trump's annexation talk of Canada as the 51st state in new American tariffs, Canada has been looking to diversify its oil markets. Since the expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, Canada has been exporting 207,000 barrels of oil to China per day. Moreover, new Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney won his position on an anti-Trump platform and has previously criticized Trump's tariffs back in 2019. Carney also has a history of working closely with China in his previous role as the Bank of England governor. Despite this, Carney labeled China as a great security threat for Canada, which may limit cooperation. China is a member of BRICS. Established in 2009 by China, India, Russia, and Brazil, BRICS was formed as a counterweight against U.S. global influence. The group prioritizes reducing its reliance on the almighty U.S. dollar and creating an alternative global finance system. Trump has even threatened 100% tariffs on BRICS nations if they created an alternative global currency to the dollar. The group has recently expanded to include members like Ethiopia, Saudi Arabia, and Egypt. It encompasses 45% of the world's population and 35% of the world's GDP. Nevertheless, many are still skeptical of how successful China's diplomatic efforts will be. For one, open trade with China can have severe risks. Many countries accuse China of unfair trade practices, such as illegal dumping, and giving its own domestic producers illegal subsidies to make them more internationally competitive. Last year, China was the subject of a record-high 198 World Trade Organization investigations into these unfair practices. To protect domestic industries, many countries are placing harsh tariffs on Chinese goods, such as electric vehicles and steel. Last year, Canada placed a 100% tariff on Chinese EVs and a 25% tariff on aluminum and steel products. Similarly, the EU has a tariff of up to 50% on Chinese EVs. Even in Brazil, domestic steel producers are lobbying the government to place tariffs on Chinese steel to end illegal dumping. Members of Mercosur, which is the regional trade bloc for South America like Argentina, are pushing back against signing a free trade agreement with China in favor of a deal with the EU instead. India has seen its trade deficit against China surge to $100 billion. Local steel and textiles producers are also suffering from Chinese dumping. In response, the Indian Trade Ministry has created a committee to track the import of cheap Chinese goods. India also recently imposed a 12% tariff on some steel imports to protect domestic steel mills. These protectionist policies may hurt China's export sector and lead to retaliatory tariffs, causing even more trade wars, which just makes everything worse. In addition, even in China's backyard, many Southeast Asian countries are very wary of over-reliance on China and are forging closer relations with the EU and USA. These countries are trying to stay neutral between the China-USA rivalry while also benefiting from a global shift of supply chains. For example, recently Vietnam has seen an explosion in manufacturing, especially since companies like Samsung and Nike have begun to invest heavily there instead of China. There are also hidden tensions and agendas between China and nations like the Philippines and Vietnam over the South China Sea. The South China Sea is a major trading route which sees over 20% of the world's trade passing through. China claims the entirety of the sea, which has created tensions with neighboring countries. Direct clashes have even occurred between Chinese coast guards and Filipino sailors. These disputes promote distrust of China and poke holes into China's purported image as a friendly trade partner. The global trade war, once seen as a mere rivalry between two economic giants, has quietly evolved into a high-stakes geopolitical chess game with far-reaching consequences. China's strategic response, crafting a vast web of trade alliances, economic investments, and diplomatic ties, signals a bold attempt to reshape the global order in its own image. While Trump's tariff-driven isolationism seeks to protect American interests, it may be unintentionally accelerating the decline of U.S. economic dominance by pushing traditional allies into China's embrace. Yet China's ascent is neither assured nor unchallenged. Despite its immense trade power, China faces mounting resistance, growing protectionism, and deep-rooted suspicion about its intentions. The paradox is stark. While China expands its influence under the banner of globalization, its unfair trade tactics and controversial territorial claims may ultimately undermine the very alliances it hopes to build. In the end, this isn't just a trade war. It is a struggle over world domination. Will the future be shaped by an open, cooperative global economy, or by competing spheres of influence fractured by distrust and friction? As countries navigate this new reality, one truth becomes clear. No country can isolate itself from the global economy without paying a heavy price, and that includes both the United States and China. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.